Tonight is about you and answering your questions about your results. So we're going to stay here and answer your questions. And so, Peter, what do we got?
I'm going to add one moment of levity here real quick by
Yes.
saying that I looked up San Antonio, the
Yeah.
population ranking, and it's either sixth or seventh, depending on what source you ask. Anybody with a kid is doing this right now and saying six, seven, I
Six,
hope.
seven. Well, there you go. Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
Nathaniel, Christine asked a question that I had to answer, but I also really want to put to you because it touches on the kind of wider range of voter contact that we do that may not be counted regularly as a statistical, significant impact because it's just such a small election that we might be working in. So Christine says, if I'm correct in understanding that it's a small vote, that it's in small voting populations that we have a harder time reaching statistical significance. Does that affect whether EVP wants to opt into targeting those elections? If you can explain the rationale for putting effort in when we know statistical significance will be harder and impossible to prove, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a great, great question, Christine. It's a really, really good question. And it gets at the two different ways that we measure our impact. We know that part of the magic of EVP, part of our special sauce, is this ability to help grow the electorate over time. And we know that that doesn't come from just focusing on the big elections. It comes from being active in these small elections where often with a little bit of money spent, you can really get people to vote. And so, no, we have never seriously thought about being active in fewer elections just so we can maybe be active in a few more of the big elections and maximize the number of statistically significant results that we get. Because although you're right in insinuating that that would probably increase the number of statistically significant results that we can report out each year and maybe make us look a little bit better, we want to be good and not just look good. Uh, and we know that the best way to truly grow this powerful voting bloc, which, as you saw from the cumulative numbers, is going to make a significant difference this fall in a whole bunch of Senate and gubernatorial races. The way to do that is to, unfortunately, Christine, do some work that we will never be able to take. I don't want to say never be able to take credit for, but never be able to take that like scientifically rigorous credit for, if that makes sense. But it is something where we're always thinking about it. And so Peter actually runs a weekly meeting with us, the elections calendar meeting, where like Peter like literally knows at any given moment like what the 300 elections are that are going on in the United States of America. And then some of those are in our 21 states. And then we need to, as a team, meet to figure out, okay, in our 21 states, which ones can we be active in? And because even we can't be involved in every election. And so we do need to pick and choose these. But usually what we are trying to determine is whether we have enough targets to even like run a phone bank into something. And so, yeah, we're trying to get as many bites at the apple as possible, Christine. Even though, yes, it does mean that there are fewer statistically significant results that we can pound our chest about at the end of each year. But great, great question.
So, Nathaniel, it was easy to tell that there are a lot of EVP stalwarts on this webinar right now, just based on the tenor of the questions, many of which revolved around the impact of, the difference in impact between different interventions. There are also some questions about, like, do we miss demographics perhaps by only using one or two interventions in a particular election? Could you give some thought to what works best, and how do we choose when we move into or how do we choose what intervention we are going to be using for a particular election?
Really, really great questions, guys. Really great questions. Okay. So, what works best is something that we think about along two axes. One is effectiveness, the other is efficiency. Effectiveness is essentially by how much can a particular intervention increase turnout. Efficiency is okay, how much can you increase that turnout per dollar spent or per volunteer hour spent? Because for obvious reasons, we can't just focus on effectiveness because some things are effective, but they're really inefficient. Some things are efficient, but they're really ineffective. And so we always think about both of those. Okay. On the effectiveness side of things, door to door canvassing is still the single most effective intervention we've got. One human being talking to another human being face to face is the best way to get people to vote, period. But it's not always that efficient. In a 2.5 hour canvassing shift, even if it's a really dense turf, and Peter and his team work very hard to get very dense turf so you don't need to walk a long time between doors, maybe you'll be able to knock on 40, 45 doors. Maybe 20 people will be home and open up. Maybe 15 of those 20 people will be the actual folks we're looking for. So that means over 2.5 hours, you've reached 15 targets. Now, still, door to door canvassing is so effective that it's worth it. Oh my God, is it worth it? But for any of you who have phone banked before, like you could be on a phone bank for half of that time and talk to 60 people. And so it is much more efficient. It's like 8 times more efficient. So we take all of these things into consideration. Canvassing, effective, not that efficient. As I mentioned, direct mail is a sweet spot. It is not as effective as canvassing, but it's up there. And it's pretty darn efficient as far as the cost per dollar created. Digital ads, video ads are very efficient and pretty darn effective. And I'm going to get to the ability for ads to reach those hard to reach people, which was another part of the question. As I alluded to earlier, though, we're not so sure about display ads. And that's part of the reason why we're trying to really figure out if these are still working, because display ads are so cheap and they're so efficient. We want them to work, but we really need some of these experiments to come back and prove it to us, or else we're not going to be spending money on them anymore. Okay, phone calls. Phone calls are consistently effective. Now, they're never going to reach the stratospheric heights that we see out of a good canvassing campaign. Usually, unless it's a really low turnout election, usually when we're talking about a statewide primary or a high turnout municipal election, we're going to be able to increase turnout through a phone banking campaign 0.5 or 1% or maybe even 1.5 percentage points. If it's a really low turnout municipal, it'll be higher, higher than that. But that's pretty good. They're consistently effective and they are consistently efficient. Now, it's a low ceiling. Phone calls aren't as effective as direct mail or door-to-door canvassing, but they're consistently effective and efficient. Postcards are also consistently effective. They are about as effective, maybe a little bit more effective than phone banking, but they are much, much less efficient. Any of you who have written postcards know the amount of time it takes you to handwrite a postcard is pretty significant. And so maybe you'll get through, I don't know, 5 or 10 an hour. In that period of time, you might be able to reach 10 times as many people on the phones. Finally, oh no, did I do everything? Yeah, digital. Yeah, I did everything. Okay, so who can be reached? Yes, different people can be reached over different modes. So for instance, if you're door-to-door canvassing, there are a whole bunch of people who Peter doesn't even put in our door-to-door canvassing universe, even though they're our targets. He cuts out people who live in buildings that have more than 9 units. Chances are you are never going to actually be able to get to someone's door if you're buzzing up. Or if it's a high rise, you're not going to get past the doorman. He cuts out people who usually are on college campuses because you're not going to be able to be allowed into the college campus. Usually you're not going to be canvassing in a gated community or something like that. And so, yeah, there are some people who can just not be canvassed. There's some people on the voter file for whom we don't have phone numbers. Or we thought we had phone numbers for them, but then one of you called and told us it was the wrong number, so we don't call them anymore. And so, yeah, there are different people we can reach through different modes, and that's why it's so important to try to pile multiple modes on top of each other. I will say digital ads are much, much better at reaching young voters. I will also say, surprise, surprise, postcards and direct mail get significantly better results with older voters. In fact, oftentimes when we're creating postcarding universes, we only send postcards to people 35 years and older, just because we get so much better results from them, and we want your time to be spent better. We don't want you sending postcards to people who just throw their mail out. Finally, what I'll say is part of the question that was asked was sort of how do we think about which interventions to use? Because we're active in so many elections each year, usually our default approach is okay, let's start with the assumption that we're going to try to do some phone banks for an election. Then maybe there are some elections where we're either running experiments, and so we're only going to do another intervention, or we'll layer on digital ads. Because again, digital ads are really efficient, just like phone banks are efficient. We can reach a lot of voters really easily and cheaply. Then, if we really want to dial up the effectiveness, maybe it's a really important election, that's when we're going to start layering in the direct mail. Canvassing and postcards are a little bit different because we only run 4 to 5 postcarding campaigns each year. And canvassing is hard to scale up. And so we only do it in areas where we have lots of really densely packed targets where we can canvass. So, really, really good questions, folks. Okay, we've still got like well over 100 people on the line. This is incredible. Okay, more questions, Peter. What you got?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Bob has a series of really good questions, all of which I want to put to you. I'm going to try to mix them up, but toward let's see, one of the ones I really want to ask is when EVP approaches a philanthropist or foundation seeking a 5, 6, or 7-digit contribution, which same for 8, do you cite an average cost per super voter created? If so, what is that number or that range?
Great, great question, Bob. So first, let me say, because we are a 501c4 nonprofit, we cannot get foundation money, but we do get lots of money from philanthropists and individual donors. And yes, 5-figure, 6-figure, we'd love to get the 7 and 8-figure. So what we do, Bob, is we absolutely cite dollar per additional vote for individual elections. Because we have a really good idea from our randomized control trials of how much it costs for us to be solely responsible for having created that vote. Now, to be clear, it varies dramatically from election to election. We can really cheaply create a new vote in a low turnout election, like a municipal election, like that Colorado Springs municipal election, which was really important and high leverage for the climate community, but was really cheap. We could do it for like $10 in those elections. Presidential generals, the cost is going to be into 3 figures. It's going to be like, over $100 per additional vote sometimes. As far as the cost per super voter created, that's a lot harder. And the answer, Bob, is no. We do not supply that. Not because we couldn't come up with an estimate. We could, but I don't want to be misleading. I don't want to pretend a level of precision that we don't actually have. Because remember, The super voters, although we are largely responsible for them, we can't run multi-year randomized control trials without really screwing up our targeting and talking to some people who don't care about the environment and some people who are already good voters, and we don't want to do that. And so I can't claim to a potential donor or philanthropist that we are solely responsible for those super voters. And so, because we can't claim that, I don't want to pretend to have precision like this is our cost per super voter created. Would it be easy to come up with that number? Yeah. In fact, that's an easier number to come up with than any of the other numbers because it's really just division, right? Like we know how much money we've spent each year and we know how many super voters we've got. It would be the easiest number in the world to come up with. But part of the reason why many environmental nonprofits, well, let me put this another way. I think you all know a lot of climate groups have been struggling lately. We are very lucky. We are growing each year. We have never had to lay people off. We have always been very efficient with our spending, and I think we are very lucky that we have built a good brand with our donors because we are brutally honest. And I think that transparency has served us well. Does it mean that we have grown more slowly than other organizations? Yeah. It also means we haven't imploded. It also means that in really hard times, we still do well. And I think part of that brutal honesty means, unfortunately, Bob, because you ask a great question, not being willing to provide data that might be a little misleading like that. And I'll give you another example, Bob. Oh my God. If I just had a nickel for every time someone asked the Environmental Voter Project to go into Montana or Wisconsin, two crucially important states, mind you, we wouldn't need to fundraise anymore. But I always tell them, dear God, don't you think we research these states? And every time we look at those states, we find that there aren't enough non-voting environmentalists there for us to make an impact. And so what I end up telling them is, please take your money and support these fine groups that we know of in those states because they're going to be able to have a bigger impact in those states than we are. And that's hard. A lot of organizations won't do that. A lot of organizations won't turn down money like that. But I think in the long term, it has given us a really strong relationship with our donors where they can trust that we're not BSing them. So I know that was a really long answer to your question, Bob, but it was a really good question. And the long and short of it is, yes, we supply cost per additional vote metrics for individual elections, but no, not for the long term. All right, Peter, you said Bob had some other questions. What were they?
I'm going to Joseph next, though.
Okay, Joseph, what you got, Joseph?
Who has a very good question in itself, but also the premise, I think, would allow you to mention a previous report of ours. Citizens ages 18 to 25 are among the most passionate about climate issues, but they vote much less often than older citizens, in part because registering and voting for the first time is hard and can be intimidating. Wouldn't EVP's logic of turning non-voting environmentalists into consistent voters apply to the youngest non-voters? So, in other words, by working only with already registered voters, are we missing an opportunity to apply the logic of our model to the group that might have the greatest marginal impact on what we're trying to accomplish here?
Really, really great questions, Joseph. So, a few things. First off, we work with a lot of young voters. We absolutely work with a lot of young voters. And I want to be clear, Joseph, what our challenge is now is not that we don't have enough targets. It's that we don't have enough money to spend on the targets that we've got, right? We can triple the amount of money that we spend just on our existing targets before we even hit a point of diminishing returns. So we're not looking to broaden the number of voters that we're talking to until we start getting more money because we think we could just we think the most efficient way to have a really big impact is to spend more on what we've got. However, boy, do you bring up some incredible points. So let me address them in three different ways. First, yes, young people care deeply about climate. However, that's been changing a lot recently. Young men in particular broke hard right over the last 2 years. And boy, did we start seeing a lot of changes in our data. And so we shouldn't assume that demography is destiny. Whereas 5 years ago, it would have been easy to look at particular demographic groups, boost turnout among those demographic groups, and trust that they're going to vote a certain way. That's not really the case anymore. I know that wasn't what you were getting at, but it's adjacent to that, and I think it's worth bringing up. Second, as far as voter registration, yes, you are absolutely right that there are a lot of likely climate first voters who aren't even registered yet. And wouldn't it be nice if we helped register them and then mobilize them? You know, when I first started the Environmental Voter Project, and Peter was the first hire, we actually did two things. We always knew that our first focus, our primary focus, was going to be talking to non-voting, already registered environmentalists, because we knew that the progressive movement writ large and the climate movement had a bigger turnout problem than we have a registration problem. But we also thought, yeah, we could do what Joseph is suggesting. We could also use our predictive models to identify people who aren't even registered yet who care about climate, and we could register them to vote. And it was a good idea. And you know what, Joseph? We sucked at it. It didn't work at all. And here's why. It turns out, one, people who aren't registered don't have as much data about them out there. And so these predictive models that are really good at identifying super environmentalists who don't vote are less precise at identifying those unregistered people who care about climate. So our models weren't as good at identifying them. And so our work was a little bit less efficient because of that. And then the second reason our work was less efficient is unregistered voters move around all the time. And so our contact rates were abysmal. Even if our model successfully identified someone who cared about climate change but wasn't yet registered to vote, it was so hard to reach them. We would have like 1% contact rates with digital ads or with canvassing or direct mail. And so, or phone banks. And so we came to the conclusion that there is something that we are really good at. And that is finding millions of already registered super environmentalists, many of whom are young, yet they're not voting and turning them into better voters. And we should focus on that, and we should leave voter reg to the voter registration groups. Because really, although there are some really cool digital tools that groups like vote.org use and some other groups, the truth is the best way to do voter registration is still just to go where there are lots of young people, like college campuses, or lots of new citizens, like naturalization ceremonies. And other groups do that better than us. But really great question, Joseph. Oh, and Peter alluded to a report. Yeah. The climate movement doesn't look quite like you might, think it does. It's changing. We have two reports on our website called Gray is the New Green, one that we did 2 years ago or 3 years ago, another we did last year, about how the largest age group of climate voters now is people 65 and older. Now, to be clear, that's using a very idiosyncratic definition of climate voters. These are people who list climate as their number one priority. But I don't think Greta would say, okay, boomer, with a sneer on her face anymore. Let's put it that way. Like boomers are the beating heart of the climate movement these days, for better or for worse.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to combine a couple of questions here, Nathaniel. Peter, not me, different Peter, asked or said, there's an interesting article in the Atlantic today indicating that one reason for the downturn in environmental engagement was the shift in emphasis from conservation, wildlife, nature, so like biodiversity, to climate change, given the latter is longer term, less local, and offers less a sense of individual agency. That makes little sense to that Peter and to this Peter. What do you think? Has it affected voter turnout? So that's the first question. I'm going to combine that with another one, which is very similar because there have been some writers and pundits recently that have suggested that Democrats maybe shouldn't be talking about climate change. Do you have any thoughts on that? So if it's possible to combine that into one answer, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so great question, Peter and Peter. So let me answer the first question first. Uh, yes, there is no doubt that the bucket of environmental issues has changed over time, and which ones get stressed has changed over time. 20 years ago, people who cared deeply about environmental issues probably spent more time dealing with uh, biodiversity, clean air, clean water, open space, things like that. Maybe some environmental justice, and now certainly, clean tech, electrification, climate. These are things that weren't as prominent 15, 20 years ago. So the underlying premise to your question, Peter, is undeniably true. Has that led to fewer people caring about this set of issues? I don't know the particular article that you're citing, and I am not one of these people who wants to be a pundit and just put out easy talking points. I like to look at evidence. And so I would love to actually look at the article because I'm sure they cite stuff. But when I think of the evidence that I have seen, that doesn't ring true to me. Because the truth of the matter is, the percentages of the electorate who listed climate and environmental issues as their top priority in the late 90s or the aughts or even the teens, the late Obama years or even the early Trump years, we're talking like 3, 4, 5%. Then in the early Trump years, it got up maybe sometimes to 8 or 9%. It wasn't until 2019, 2020, and then unfortunately COVID hit that we started to see 14, 15, 16% of Americans say that climate or the environment was their number one priority. And that timeline just doesn't align with what you're saying the premise of this Atlantic article was. Because boy, was climate change on everybody's lips at that point in time when we saw that peak. So it doesn't seem like that would be the case. But Peter, boy, am I always open to looking at evidence like that. To the second part of that part of your question, is it impacting turnout? No, we're not seeing that impact turnout at all. At all. And certainly at the Environmental Voter Project, when we are identifying voters and building these predictive models to figure out who we're going to target, we have a catchment basin where we're trying to catch all of those types of voters. If someone lists as their top priority clean air or clean water or biodiversity, yeah, they come into our universe. If they are unlikely to vote, we're going to mobilize them. Same thing for someone who lists clean energy as their number one priority or climate change. We want both of them. We've been asked by people before, hey, are you going to change your name to Climate Voter Project? No, no. We also care about more traditional environmental issues. And yeah, they don't always perfectly overlap, but boy, are they all important. You've ever seen a kid have an asthma attack because of the toxic air they are breathing? Believe me, that is important. It's important to a family, it's important to a community. So yeah, we focus on both of those things. As far as the other questions that was asked, the should Democrats still be talking about climate? I'm sure some of you, if you asked that, are alluding to the New York Times op-ed that came out a few days ago. And yeah, first let me just say this. It rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And as I hope you all understand about the Environmental Voter Project, we try to bring a lot of Socratic ignorance and humility to our work. The only way we are going to solve big, difficult problems is to never assume that we have all the answers. And I think we all need to get very comfortable having conversations like this. Conversations like, is it a good idea to talk about climate change? Is it a good idea to talk about this? If so, how should we talk about it? Believe me, I understand why activists get really riled up when things like this get written. But I think we have to be able to have these conversations. I think we also need to admit that, yes, there is no doubt that climate change is a low voter priority right now. And two, when something is a low voter priority in a competitive attention economy, then you need to worry about opportunity costs. I realized I just used like a lot of nerdy words there. A better way to say that is you can only talk about a few things in politics. And so if one of those things isn't a very big voter priority, it is totally reasonable to question, should Democrats be talking a lot about that? So I think these are conversations worth having. That being said, with that enormous caveat, oh boy, did I have a lot of problems with that op-ed, okay? I'm going to try to very, very quickly run through them because you guys have been patient staying on the line so long. Okay, first, just the underlying premise that Democrats are talking about climate change too much is absurd. Like, please, I beg of you, tell me where all of these politicians are who supposedly talk about climate change all the time, because I would love to visit that place, okay? Like, I just think, like, these are these straw men that only exist in op-eds, and it's kind of silly to assume that there's this problem that, like, people are talking about climate too much. Like, no, I'm sorry. That is not a problem that exists right now. Second, yes, climate change is a low political priority for Americans, but, and Peter or Shannon, if you could share this link in the chat, I'd appreciate it. At the end of last summer, we did some really interesting polling at the Environmental Voter Project where we came to realize even though climate's a low political priority for Americans, it's actually a really high priority for them when they're not thinking about politics. And that's a really weird dichotomy, but it suggests that actually maybe politicians could have something to gain from raising the political salience of climate, from talking about it more often in their campaigns. Third, just because something isn't a high voter priority doesn't mean politicians shouldn't talk about it. In 2024 exit polls, climate change was the issue that Democrats beat Republicans on more than any other. So it's another way to say that. Voters gave Democrats the biggest advantage on climate more than any other issue. And it wasn't just voters writ large. Independents, when you focus in on independents in 2024, they gave Democrats the biggest issue advantage over Republicans on abortion, but it only beat climate change by 1 point. So climate change was the second best issue. So I would argue that, like, climate change is almost approaching wedge issue status, where, yeah, it's not a very high priority, but it is so good for certain politicians that they should be talking about it all the time. And the analogy I think of is the Epstein files, right? Like, does anybody seriously think that it's a bad idea for people to talk about the Epstein files? No. But we all have to admit it's not a high voter priority, right? No, but you talk about it because it's so embarrassing for a particular candidate or a particular politician or a particular party that you want to raise the salience. I think we need to start thinking about climate that way. It's an issue that's so good for certain politicians that it is worthwhile raising its salience. Another point to make on this: climate change ain't going away anytime soon. This isn't a fleeting issue. And so politicians need to figure out how to talk about it. Just they need to figure out how to talk about it because it's not going away. There is also some real value to taking big stands, especially for Democrats, I would say. There's this really weird thing going on in polls right now where Democrats are beating Republicans on what's called generic ballot tests. So the question is usually for Congress, would you vote for a Democrat or a Republican? And Democrats are winning by 5, 6, 7 points on all of those. But in the same poll, if you ask people, do you approve or disapprove of Republicans or Democrats? Yeah, Republicans are underwater by like 20 points, and Democrats are underwater by 30 points. So, how do you square that circle? People disapprove more of Democrats, but they're going to vote for Democrats over Republicans. Well, I'll tell you how you square that circle. Square that circle by understanding that Democrats are disgusted with Democrats. That's why Democrats have such low approval ratings, yet they're winning generic ballot matches with Republicans. And so that gets to my point with like, some people just need to get some courage and take some stands here. And finally, I would just say we live in a conservative media environment where there is so much distorted messaging around climate poisoning people's brains that there is a real moral imperative to push back on that. What we cannot stay silent in the face of such enormous, not just misinformation, but dangerous, like fatal misinformation. That's not to say that politicians need to talk about it all the time, but this idea that we can just like duck and cover and hope that everything's okay if we don't talk about climate for a few years, no, that's a fool's errand. It's a fool's errand.
Nathaniel, it is 9:38 Eastern Time. Do we have time for one or two more questions?
We have time for, I can't believe there's still so many people on. You guys are incredible, but we are going to keep going because this is for you. It is your results webinar. Yes, let's do two more questions.
You did get a couple amen and preach responses, by the way, to what you just
Great.
said.
Great.
I'm going to combine a couple here for this next one. Anonymous asked, with all the recent redistricting decisions and battles, what should climate activists and voter turnout activists be focusing on right now? I'm going to combine that with more of a statement from Lori. Climate and the environment have been my top issue for years, but when in the last few years, when Trump returned to office, I pivoted to focusing on protecting our democracy. And for now, that's my top issue. In addition to everything else, I can see protecting democracy as the best thing I can do for the environment right now. I think those kind of go hand in hand.
They go hand in hand. Okay, so I'll start with Lori's. Lori, I totally get it. There's no denying that we have a multi-crisis moment at the moment right now. Uh, but what I will say is the democracy crisis and the climate crisis are inextricably combined. We're not going to be able to address the climate crisis without a healthy democracy. Moreover, the very people who we need to have voting in order to win back power and re-strengthen our democracy are these people who we are targeting. We need them. We know that these norms ain't going to save themselves. Thomas Jefferson isn't going to walk into a door and put us all back into our place. Like, we need to win political power back. And the way we do that is getting these climate first values aligned voters to the polls. We are a nonpartisan organization, and so I'm not going to go into a lot of the publicly available data about how these people vote or things like that. But I will say these are the people who will save our democracy. These are the people we need to get to vote. But I am with you, Lori. Believe me, I worry about the democracy crisis every single day. Every single day. It's frightening. And I'm sure you're not alone on this call. I'm sure there are a lot of people who are sitting here worrying about climate and worrying about democracy and realizing the importance of power building right now. To get to the question about redistricting and the Voting Rights Act and what climate activists can do right now, I will answer the question because this is about politics and this is about taking action. But before I get right to the politics, I do just want to pause and say that this is an absolute tragedy for our democracy and for our society. And we'll get to politics because we need to win, but we also just need to pause and recognize that we are living through a time that is re-disenfranchising minorities. And all of those times that you were reading a history book and you were wondering whether you would be a good ally, well, now's the time that you can prove it. We all need to figure out what we can do to fight and fight hard for the future of our democracy and for a healthy multiracial society. And this is a tragedy, what is happening. All right, now for some politics. Okay. Uh, what this has done is make 2027 next year a year where, and I'm sorry, I know you guys don't want to hear this, all the maps are going to be redrawn. It's going to be absolutely bonkers. And because of that, we need to think more about the importance of governor's races and state legislative races over the next 5.5 months. And so this gets to that question, what can we as climate activists do? Obviously, like I know you all are obsessed with Senate races. I'm not going to pretend like I'm not obsessed with Senate races. Like, of course we're all obsessed with Senate races. And that we're obsessed with House races too. Like, of course we are. But there are going to be some places that are really deserving of your time and attention as volunteers and donors because of these redistricting changes that are coming up next year. And I'm just going to go for a few off the top of my head so that we can finish up here. First, Arizona. Arizona doesn't have a US Senate race. And so it's actually going to be underinvested in compared to previous years. But they have 3, maybe 4 competitive US House races, so they're still important there. But for this redistricting stuff, they're going to have a really tight gubernatorial race, and both their state House and their state Senate are literally as close as possible. I think Republicans have 1-seat majorities in both. And so there is a chance that 6 months from now, there will be a Republican trifecta in Arizona. There is also a chance that 6 months from now, there will be a Democratic trifecta in Arizona. And that will have enormous ramifications for redistricting. Remember, not just at the federal level, but also at the state and local level. Same thing holds true for Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, we're all used to focusing on Pennsylvania, where they don't have a US Senate race this year. And most people assume, I think rightly so, that Governor Josh Shapiro is probably going to win pretty handily. And so again, Pennsylvania is one of these states that people are used to being obsessed over, but it might be underinvested in this year, despite the fact that they have like 3 toss-up congressionals and probably 2 more competitive ones on top of that. They have both houses of the state legislature are super, super tight. This is another instance where there'll probably be a Democratic governor after this cycle, but who knows what's going to happen with the state legislature. And whether Democrats want to go on offense or play defense, whether Republicans want to go on offense or play defense, it's all going to be decided in these races. The third state that I'll just mention, yes, Michigan will be important for the U.S. Senate, so people are going to be focused on that. But this is another state where both houses of the state legislature and the governor's race are going to be really, really important. Finally, I'll say look at some of the redistricting measures. We will let you know about them. Peter is on top of this stuff like day in, day out. But like Colorado is probably going to have two competing measures about redrawing maps. Colorado is a state that people aren't going to be paying attention to. And so these are things that you guys can do as activists over the next 5 months. Put your time, put your money, not just into our efforts in the Colorados and Arizonas and Pennsylvanias, but into other groups' efforts, because that's how we can build power that will have significant ramifications next year. Because I hate to tell you, when all of this stuff starts happening next year, there's going to be very little we can do about it other than call up the people who were elected this fall. All right. We have now gone an hour and 47 minutes. I hope that this was a good extended Q&A. We really, really wanted to give you answers to all of your questions. If you still have questions for us, I mean it. Email us at info@environmentalvoter.org. We use the info one because sometimes it's easier for some people to answer rather than others, but reach out to us. We would love to answer them for you. And let me just close by saying two things. First, thank you. I really, really hope that you feel like you're a part of all the work that we do. Not just because we put together these slide decks and present to you all the impact that you have, working with us, but because we know that your time is valuable and we know that your donations are obviously valuable and that you are making a decision to work with us. And I hope you take pride in these results and feel like you're a real part of something. And that doesn't just go to the volunteers and the donors, it also goes to our volunteer leaders, the people who run those phone banks for you and run the canvases and postcarding parties. Just thank you, thank you, thank you. We had a great year in 2025. We're having a great year in 2026. And we can go into this crucially important midterm cycle knowing so much of our messaging works. And that's just a luxury that so many other organizations don't have. The final thing I will say is I'm going to ask for your help again. And I'm not going to be shy about it. Some people might think it's awkward to thank you and then immediately ask for help again. I ain't one of them because I know how important the next 24 weeks are. I know that we have proven messages that we can deliver over proven communication modes to people who we know we will turn from non-voters into voters. We also have individually identified all 3.4 million of our targets. So we literally know the people we need to talk to. We know how to communicate with them. We have the messages to do it. And we just need the money and the volunteer time. So please, 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 please take a moment right now, go into the chat and sign up to volunteer or sign up to become a monthly donor or sign up to make a donation and make it generous. Make it generous, not because you like us, not because you want to do us a favor, but because I hope we are executing on the change that you want to see. We are making these changes happen. So I'm really, really grateful for all of you. My God, I can't believe so many of you are still on an hour and 50 minutes in. So grateful to all of you for being part of our work. It is a real, true honor to do this work with you. And I can't wait to see you on the phone banks, and I can't wait to see your donations come into my inbox. Because I think you all know I write an email thanking every single one of you when you donate, right? It's really, really important that I do that, and I love doing it. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Bye-bye.